It's virtually free, it's everywhere, and if science could put it inside a pill, people would be lined up around the block willing to pay anything to get it. My guest today is fitness industry expert Kevin Steele, and he's going to show us the latest and greatest on what we're learning about exercise, your brain, anti-aging, and just plain feeling good. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Next Level Healing. I'm your host, Dr. Tara Perry. My guest today has spent decades in the health and fitness industry. He has completed the Ironman several times, and I'm going to let him introduce himself because his bio is about this long. I met him at a recent conference and was deeply impressed with his clarity and just the common sense approach to what exercise can do to completely change your life. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank
Kevin.
you. All right. It's wonderful to be here with you today. Thanks for this opportunity. I've spent my entire life, actually. I started out as an athlete and I've always loved exercise. I like the process of exercise and training as much as the competition. I started out playing baseball and basketball, 8 years of each. And then I got involved in the endurance world. You mentioned the Ironman. That was my kind of initial motivation. I completely switched gears. And back in the day, everybody told me that I couldn't do it because I wasn't formally trained in any of those three disciplines, swimming, cycling, and running. And, there was no real training protocol back in the days, the early days. The first Ironman in Hawaii was in 1978. And I jumped in a couple of years later and started doing things. But academically, I was kind of aligned with it because my undergraduate degree is in physical education and sports medicine. And so it was really cool because I got turned on and introduced to exercise physiology, where I could get academic credit for learning how to enhance my own performance, which back in those days, that's all I cared about was my performance and sport. And so, it just kept going. And eventually I got into Kona and did my first Ironman. And, along the way, I've, fell in love with even more in regard those, all three of those disciplines. I've done several marathons I did the first decade of LA, for example, and I've run Boston and New York and whatever. And then cycling, I really love cycling. I like them all equally. I still swim and bike today. I don't run anymore just simply because I took the kind of preventive approach to running. I still enjoy it, but I've seen several friends have hip and back knee replacements. And so that was never going to be my thing. But so I started out teaching and coaching at a small university in Malibu, California called Pepperdine in the PE and sports medicine department. And I also started a personal training business working with some local docs here in town. And one of them found me and got me involved with him when we had a small business doing preventive executive healthcare program for decentralized companies around the US. And this was back in the early 80s. So he was very, very progressive in his thinking. I was a young entrepreneurial guy. And I was like, okay, this sounds cool. I'm going to go out and, meet all these senior executives and work with them and, help them. They would have an annual physical, and then all their reports would be sent back to our office. I would sit down and look at their medical records and history and assess based on where they currently were, what they needed from an exercise perspective, and then a nutritional eating strategy. And then, we had an internist on the team that would interpret and discuss their specific medical concerns. And so that's how I really kind of cut my teeth in this world. And so I also realized and recognized at that point that I needed to go back to school because I'm working now with a series of physicians and other healthcare providers and professionals. So I went to graduate school and got my PhD in exercise physiology and with a subspecialty in nutrition. And again, it was really cool because I was training for, all this endurance stuff. And I just got deeper and deeper into the performance side of things, as well as the general physiology, the depth of physiology, and how exercise impacts every organ and cell in our body. And that was very, very exciting to me. And along the way, during that time, I met a guy. I was the aquatic director at Pepperdine as well. And this gentleman moved to town, and he started showing up at the pool. And one day I asked him, I said, "What are you training for?" And he said, "I'm training for the Ironman." And I said, "Cool, so am I." He said, "Great, let's train together." So we started training together. And about 6 months into our relationship, he said, I may have some projects for you. And I said, "That's great, but I don't even know what you do for a living." And the guy was the founder and his name was Don Wildman, and he was the founder and CEO of, at the time, the world's largest health club organization. And so he eventually, once I finished my PhD, he recruited me into the health club business. And I became the director of education, research, and member services for the world's largest health club company. And so I left my life in academia at Pepperdine, and the firm that I was working with in corporate wellness. I left that. I still sit on a board at Pepperdine today and work with some of our athletes, but I'm no longer faculty or staff there. But
Hey guys, studies are showing that 68% of people that watch podcasts regularly don't click the subscribe button. Do me a huge favor. If you like this content, click subscribe so other people know where to go for the cool stuff. Thank you. It sounds like one of your earlier jobs was to help people that made a lot of money and had a lot of responsibility stay healthy and feel good.
yeah, that's absolutely true. And, highly successful, motivated people, they have a tendency sometimes to forget or maybe not even know some of the physiological and psychological benefits that can even take them to the next level as far as their personal performance and productivity. And so that was kind of the angle, because everybody's concerned about time, right? I don't have time to exercise. I don't have time to eat right. I don't have time to do this. I blah blah blah. I'm working 12, 14 hours a day. I've got kids. But the bottom line at the end of the day is, if you really take care of yourself, meaning you exercise regularly and consistency with a myriad and a mix, and you eat well, have a healthy eating strategy, and you recover, you get good quality sleep and do some other things, then you are going to enhance your productivity and your performance physically and mentally beyond your belief and expectations. I like to say you don't have time to not do it. That's my position. Because at the end of the day, you've heard the saying, you're going to pay the fiddler to dance at some point. And we all have choices. And it starts the minute you open your eyes first thing in the morning. You have a choice of how you're going to attack that day. And what if you're gonna move and be active, exercise, what you're gonna put in your mouth, how you're gonna eat, and then what the rest of that day looks like, right? And the aggregate of those every minute of everyday choices turn out to be the path of longevity and good quality health, or not so good chronic conditions and diseases, as we see, unfortunately, way too much of in this country. When you look at the adult population in the US, it's 70%, 7 out of 10 people are overweight, and 40% are considered clinically obese, which means they have a 30 or higher BMI on the scale, which is just criminal. Because in this country, we have all the tools, all the knowledge, all the education. There's absolutely no reason. We have technology, we have all of it. There's no reason anywhere anyone should have these chronic problems and conditions. And another stat I'll throw out at you is that only 7% of the top chronic conditions and diseases are genetic predisposition or family history related. 7%. That means 93% of all these diseases and conditions we see and read and hear about out there are based on lifestyle related choices and or neglect of things that they can and should be doing, which is, again, in my mind, it's very, very sad, because we consider the United States of America, cutting edge in so many areas, but yet when you look at and by the way, I don't believe we have a healthcare system. I call it a disease management system, because if we truly had a healthcare system, it would be focused on prevention. Not, we have the greatest curative system in the world. If something's wrong, we can fix it. But we should be putting our emphasis and our resources, the majority of them, on the front end where we don't even need to go in and be fixed, because we can reduce that 93% by a huge amount just by doing some of the things, that I've alluded to earlier.
Couldn't agree more. And the U.S. spends more than any other country by a long shot on healthcare, and we have some of the worst outcomes. I love in your talk, you said if you could make a pill out of all the benefits of exercise, people would line up around the block and pay anything for it. Can you just dive into what I mean, I know the list goes on and on and on, but I'd really love to give our listeners a kind of big bow wrapped around some of those benefits.
Oh, again, I mean, another sad stat is that people over 45 in this country are on, at least the majority are on, taking one medication, and people 55 and above are 3 to 5 medications, which again, and most of them are for hypertension, diabetes, vascular disease, those kinds of things. And now, of course, the biggest rage is what? The GLP-1s, right? And those they were originally designed for another purpose, but they found out that one of the side effects of these GLP-1s is weight loss. And so, of course, the big pharma's pivoted because everybody wants to lose weight, and now they're marketing them across the board as the number one weight loss drug in the world. And so, exercise and a healthy eating strategy will do everything that does, plus so much more. I mean, we have physiological.
With healthy side effects rather than bad side effects.
No side effects. I mean, the only good things unless you overdo it. But, there's so many, like these GLP-1s, for example. One of the biggest side effects is that if you just take the drug and you don't do anything else, you're losing weight. But the majority of what they don't tell you is the majority of the weight that you're losing is your lean body mass, meaning your muscle mass. And your muscle mass is the number one metabolic engine for our bodies. Between the muscular system and the endocrine system, that's what regulates everything. And muscle is a much more active tissue than fat is. So, the higher your percentage muscle is, lean tissue is, to your overall body fat percentage, then the more your metabolic system is going to be more efficient, and you're going to burn more calories even while you're sitting at your desk. And obviously, the stimulus for muscle, we have 600 muscles in our body. And so our body is designed to move. If it wasn't designed to move, it wouldn't be wrapped in muscle, okay? So that's number one. And number two is that for a long time, we didn't know much about what happens with exercise and its impact on the brain. But in the last 20 years, we've had some miraculous research that shows that you hear about Alzheimer's, you hear about dementia, everything else. The number one thing in the mitigation and prevention of loss of memory and other brain-related chronic conditions is regular exercise. And regular exercise actually has been shown now for a decade to regenerate and grow new neurons in our brain and expand the gray matter and the white matter in our brain, which means that, people used to think and believe that as we age, our brain actually shrinks. And exercise counters that, and you actually can grow your brain, the real estate, if you will, to a certain degree with all these new neurons. And that impacts everything. That impacts your memory, your executive function, your cognitive capabilities, your recall speed, your processing speed. All of these things are enhanced And there's what we call neurotransmitters that are also stimulated by regular exercise. And that is, most people are familiar with what's called beta endorphins. And the nickname is the runner's high. And what these are is natural painkillers, and they also give you they're kind of mood altering in the sense that after you have a session of exercise, it gives you this kind of nice mellow feeling. And so there's another neurotransmitter called BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor, and that's like fertilizer for your brain. It stimulates growth of every area of your brain. So that's just a few real high-level benefits of regular exercise. And by the way, both cardio or aerobic exercise and resistance or strength training, weight training exercises impact your brain positively. So those are some of the benefits there. And then from the neck down, I mean, the cardiovascular benefits from aerobic exercise are pretty well known. Your heart rate, your blood pressure, all of those things are positively impacted. Your lung, your pulmonary function, all of that is enhanced. What's called your stroke volume or the efficiency of your heart really is improved. And that is, you take your resting heart rate in the morning, and the average person is usually between 70 and 80, which is high, but that's the average. And a well-conditioned athlete is anywhere between 42 and 52 in the morning. So what that is your heart rate, your heart is beating, and with every beat, it's pumping blood out into the periphery. And the faster your heart has to work, the more stress puts on it. So when you're sitting at your desk or wherever and your heart's beating fast, your body's stressed more. And vice versa, when your heart's beating slower, it's pumping the same volume, but there's a lot less stress on it. And that's a huge benefit, especially as we age. So that's another thing. And then we talk about, blood sugar and inflammation. Exercise, again, helps regulate all of that because you want to have your blood sugar at a very, very even level, just like your blood pressure. Your body counters everything that you do. And so it's called homeostasis, and they work within fine levels of each other. And exercise has a positive impact in keeping your blood sugar and your blood pressure right where it's supposed to be. When you exercise, of course, your blood pressure goes up a little bit, but then it comes down, and at resting, it's lower because of the positive stress that it puts on your body. And the same thing with your blood glucose and insulin levels. It's called insulin sensitivity. If we have too much insulin production over time, it puts too much stress on the pancreas. And ultimately, over years, that's where we lead to type 2 diabetes.
So two people with the same relatively healthy diet, if one exercises and one doesn't, the one that exercises will have a lower A1C and have better sensitivity to insulin?
Absolutely. Absolutely. No doubt about it. And here's another miraculous benefit of exercise. You can actually reverse type 2 diabetes by consistent, regular exercise and a real healthy eating strategy. Most people don't know that. They don't believe it. And plus, it takes some work and it takes changing your lifestyle. Most people, believe it or not, are more comfortable and would rather take the insulin, take the medication, and continue to eat the way they want to and not do the exercise. But you can reverse type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is a lifestyle disease. It's not hereditary. Type 1 is a hereditary disease. That means you inherit it from your parents. But
you probably saw the famous movie, The Magic Pill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Type 2, the one that is most prevalent in this country, is lifestyle related. And you can reverse it or you can prevent it by the way you choose to live.
I love that you shared about BDNF, like Miracle Grow in the brain, and how you also told us about the studies that are out that are new now that show that it can reduce the amyloid plaques in the brain. That's super exciting. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, it is. And actually, I'm gonna tell you about a book that is not new, but it was kind of it really put a, a spotlight on the whole kind of mental component and how exercise influences it. It was written in 2004. It published in 2004 by a Harvard psychiatrist named Dr. John Rady. The book is called Spark, and it goes over everything I'm talking about here, and it gives a great kind of insight into all the ways that cardiovascular exercise particularly impacts our brain, and talks about anxiety, talks about stress, talks about depression. And Dr. Rady, he challenged the model of treating those three disorders, if you will, with pharmacology versus exercise therapy. And he proved that you can get the same results and outcomes or better with exercise than you can using pharmaceutical drugs with his patients. And that was revolutionary because the psychiatric world has always been about prescribing medications for anxiety, depression, and all these other things. Xanax being one of the most popular, as most people know. So what Rady and his colleagues showed was revolutionary, to the point that there was a lot of challenge coming out from that discipline for a long time. But it's all evidence-based, and there's nobody that can dispute it now. And there's been a lot of replication of some of those early studies that he had quoted and demonstrated. And another interesting thing that he highlighted, and this impacts our children. Our children are in some of the worst physical and emotional conditions they've ever been in our history. We see evidence in 6 to 9-year-olds now, preliminary evidence of heart disease development. And, the kids are constantly, you're hearing about ADHD, all these kids are out of control in schools. Well, one of the biggest reasons for that is because physical education has been taken away. And again, our bodies are designed to move, and especially as they're growing, the kids need to get outside, need to play, they need to be expending some of this energy. They shouldn't be sitting in classrooms all day. And so there was a study done in Naperville, Illinois, back about 25 years ago, and they put kids on structured exercise programs with heart rate monitors. I mean, they were legitimate protocols, and they monitored them for an academic year. And what they found was, number one, was that ADHD that a lot of these kids were experiencing went away. And the ones that were on Ritalin and some of the other medications, they went off the medications. That was number one. Number two, the kids' demeanors changed. Their attitudes changed. Of course, again, the influences of the neurotransmitters being released in their heads. And their scores, their academic scores, test scores, were off the charts. So it's not rocket science to conclude that regular exercise is beneficial for kids in a myriad of ways.
And they had a control group for this, right? They had
control. It was a legitimate double, the design was 100% legitimate. That study has been replicated multiple times. And the sad thing is that there's still in this country, only one state in this country that requires physical education in public schools. And that state is Illinois. So, there's a lot of private schools that mandate physical education, but public schools, no. And it was taken out for budgetary reasons and also because it wasn't considered core curriculum, which again, if you look at what's going on in the world today with all the cost associated with poor health, then anybody that made those statements probably aren't around anymore anyway. So
And what's so wonderful about it is that when you do get into an exercise program, it becomes addicting to the point where you wouldn't give it up. Are there any data or statistics or studies that has looked at that? The number of people that when they got on a program, stayed on the program because it just felt too good to leave it?
yes, there are, and there's two kind of reasons for that. Number one is there's a psychological component. There's that feel good, kind of the neurotransmitters. Once you get done with exercise, you're always feeling better. You're in a much more mellow place. Your focus, your clarity, your concentration, all of those things are enhanced. So that's the whole kind of from the neck up benefits of exercise. And by the way, the disciplines of psychology and psychiatry have documented this time and time again over the last 25 years. And then from the neck down, all those benefits that I've talked about and many, many more are taking place. So, if you start an exercise program and you feel like want to lose some weight, maybe you're 5, 10, 15, 20 pounds up, and you start exercising and changing your eating, you're going to start losing the weight, right? Your body composition is going to change. All of a sudden, your pants are going to fit better. Your shirt, everything's going to fit better. You're going to feel better because you're moving the way your body's designed to move. And you're gonna say, hey, you know what? I really like this. I like this me better than that me. And so I'm going to continue to do what got me to this me and stay away from the habits and the lifestyle that I was doing before. That happens in the majority of people. However, there are people that slip back, and they say, if they are, even if they've lost a significant amount of weight, and that's what we call yo-yoing, and that's much more stressful on your body than it is to just maintain a higher weight, just because your body systems are constantly going up and down all the time. But, for the reason that, for people that don't enjoy exercise, which are the majority, they consider it work. And so, people don't want to do work outside of doing their other work. And so they eventually, they get to a place that they're happy with and they say, oh, you know what? I'm here. So I can have another bag of potato chips. I still look good. Or I can have this, whatever dessert, and then all of a sudden one night becomes 2 nights, becomes 3 nights, and they're back to their old habits again. But most people, when they get to a place that they're new me, they like it and they do the things to stay in that game. And so that's the good news, but it's challenging to get people there. That's for sure.
It was interesting when you were speaking to this group of doctors, you asked them how many exercised regularly, and you were not expecting to see a lot of hands go up, which is really interesting because doctors you think would be intimately familiar with these tools that you're offering here. This particular group, because it was functional medicine doctors, a lot of hands did go up. But the statistics on people belonging to a gym or health club in America is not super high. It's only about 18 to 20% that belong to a health or a club, and about 26% of adult Americans exercise regularly. That's really pathetic.
It is. It is when you think about that. Number one, there's clubs and studios everywhere. We have approximately 40,000 facilities of some type, meaning it could be a yoga studio, a Pilates studio, it could be a commercial health club, it could be a YMCA, it could be a JCC, it could be a community rec center, it could be a university rec center. So they're everywhere, right? There's absolutely no reason that a person can't belong to, and they're all different cost structures as far as membership goes, from $10 a month up to $500 a month. Okay. So from a socioeconomic standpoint, there's a wide range. So everybody can afford it. And the other thing about exercise is you don't even need to belong to a facility. You can go out and take a walk, a 30-minute walk every day, any time of the day, and it costs you zero, right? You can do push-ups, you can do sit-ups, you can do ab curls, you can do wall sits, you can do step-ups, you can walk up and down stairs. There's a million different things you can do that will cost you zero. You just need to do it consistently to get the benefits, some of these benefits we're talking about. So in my mind, there is absolutely no excuse whatsoever that those numbers and statistics remain the same. And I've been in the industry 40 years now, and we really have not moved the needle to increase the penetration of people joining facilities. And that is something that the industry still is wrestling with every day, scratching their head, trying to figure out how they increase penetration, get more people to come in their doors. And, then you look at it from the academic perspective, the government perspective, or the healthcare perspective, or even science, and say, why is only 26% of the American population exercising regularly? And, everybody comes up with 15 different answers. But the reality is that there's nobody that's really providing solutions. And that's what we need. And back to your comment about, when we were at the mutual conference we were just at, I was pleasantly surprised because, physicians in this country are not educated in medical school about exercise science, and they have very little exposure, if any, to nutrition. So, these guys, and then, they're expected, if they're dealing with patients that are hypertensive, diabetic, overweight, or a myriad of other metabolic related issues or situations, what's the first two things that they say? Well, you need to eat better and you need to get regular exercise.
With no instructions.
Well, what is the patient? How's the patient supposed to react and respond to that? Well, doc, what does that mean? How do I eat better? Well, eat more fruits and vegetables. And what do I do? How much exercise? Well, just go out and do something, right? So, in a sense, if the doc tells the patient to do something, they'll do it, but the patient needs to have specific directions. And that's one of the things we were talking about at the conference. And I was pleasantly surprised to see the open-mindedness and the support and understanding in this, and the fact that 75% of the room raised their hands and said that they exercise regularly, because that's not the responses that I get typically when I speak to, groups of physicians in general. And I never like the broad stroke, make general statements, but, typically you get the line, well, I don't really have enough time in the day to exercise. So, they're just like the average person that, is time crunched and everything else. But, you're either going to take the time and, take care of yourself now, or you're going to deal with all the kind of problems you have later on.
And as far as going to your doctor and asking what to eat, up until recently, the food pyramid was completely upside down. Do you want to comment on that?
Oh, that's a topic that, I can speak a day or 5 days on, but I believe that the best long-term healthy eating strategy, both for performance, weight management, mental clarity, all of the things we're talking about, is a whole food, plant-based eating strategy, meaning that you eat as much fresh fruits and vegetables as you can. And there's plenty, there's a whole kind of school of thinking. There's a lot of myth around the fact that we don't get enough protein, if you eat a plant-based eating, approach, which is completely false. First of all, there's protein in everything. No plant can grow to maturity without protein, carbohydrate, and fat. It's just impossible for that to happen. Now, are there different amounts of protein, and are there different categories of protein involved in the different plants? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, there's plenty of good quality protein involved in plants. Now, when you talk about animal protein, there's a lot of other things associated with animal protein. And specifically, if you get it through our mass-produced food industry these days in your average supermarket, because most people are not aware of how it doesn't matter if it's beef, poultry, fish, most of it is farm raised. And so that means that they're subjected to hormones and antibiotics from the time that they're just born all the way up to the time they go to the slaughterhouse. That means you ingest all of that, and that has impact on your physiology. Not to mention the fact that most of them are raised in cages, meaning they get no exercise. And that means that their visceral fat, the deep fat in their body, in their tissues, is a very high percentage. And people like to eat that. That's what's called marbling in a steak, and makes it softer and more attractive to the taste buds. I don't know. I haven't eaten any kind of beef or chicken or poultry for a long, long time, but that's the most expensive cuts of beef, which tend to be the worst for us from a health perspective.
And
So
from an animal that's eating a diet that it can't live on, but it does make them fat.
exactly. So, the whole system is really rigged against us because people have this misconception that food manufacturers and agribusiness cares about our health. They don't. They care about one thing, and that's their profitability. And it's unfortunate and it's very sad because they should be looking out for our health, but they're not. We need to be our own personal advocates when it comes to what we eat and how much we exercise and how we interface with our healthcare system. And so when you talk about, being healthy and being all the way fit and productive and your performance well, it takes all these things into consideration, right? And so there are ways that you can eat. I don't mean to sound like you shouldn't eat any kind of animal products or protein whatsoever. I choose not to, but if you're going to eat it, you want to find the animal that's preferably been raised in the wild on a farm that's grass fed and there's no hormones exposed to them or antibiotics or any of that kind of stuff. Because again, that's all ingested and absorbed into their tissue, which you end up eating. Right. And then the other thing is you have to be equally as aware with the fruits and vegetables, because if they're mass produced by big agribusiness, there's a high probability that they're subjected to pesticides and herbicides, right? So, and there's also there's nutrient depletion in the soil based on the fact of crop rotation or lack thereof. So there's a lot of things that we unfortunately need to be concerned about that our ancestors 100 years ago didn't. And so there are all these environmental toxins, the way the animals and the food in general is raised. We need to be aware of that. There are ways, if you can and you can afford it. I realize that it's a little more expensive, but anytime you have the opportunity to eat organically, you absolutely should, because there's to be qualified legally as organic, there are certain steps, the way the food is grown and handled, that are mandatory, that precludes them from using the pesticides and the herbicides and all of that stuff. So,
And what about getting to know your local farmers?
that's the best and most high quality that you can get is straight from them, as long as they're not using all the stuff we're talking about. That's the best possible scenario.
So do you call yourself a vegan or a vegetarian? Are you one of those two?
Like I said, although I describe myself as having a plant-based eating strategy, every once in a while, if I'm at a really nice, high-end restaurant where I'll have a piece of I'll eat a wild Alaskan salmon once in a while. That's pretty much the extent. I eat maybe once a month, but the rest of the time, I haven't eaten any beef or chicken since the early 80s. And I lean pretty close to vegan.
I love what you shared about the exercise being so great for preventing amyloid plaques, for being wonderful for aging. You told this wonderful story about Sting being hooked up to an EEG and measuring the brain waves and how his whole brain lit up. Could you tell us why that's an important story?
Well, so I'm talking a lot about exercise and nutrition, and there's a couple of other components when we talk about our brain and functionality and efficiency and optimization. For me, I'm all about optimization. I use the analogy often when I'm talking about nutrition about a Ferrari versus a Volkswagen. And the question is, if you put regular fuel in both vehicles, will both vehicles run? Of course they will. Now, will the Ferrari run at its optimal level? Absolutely not. The Ferrari needs high performance fuel and it needs to be driven regularly to perform at its optimal level. Well, our body's the same way. We can perform. I mean, a perfect example of how amazing our body is at adaptation and adapting to the world we live in is cigarette smoking, right? We know that cigarette smoke is poison and it kills us. We know that unequivocally. We've known that for many, many years. However, somehow the body can adapt and adjust and continue to function for decades of smoking. Same thing with drinking alcohol or any other kind of, dangerous substance that we put into our bodies. It adapts and it functions. However, is it functioning optimally and are we accelerating the aging process? The answer to those two questions is absolutely yes, we're accelerating the aging process. And can it function optimally? Absolutely not. And so the other component of this is sleep. We need to have sleep. That's when the brain completely consider sleep like taking the garbage out. That's when the brain completely reboots, cleans itself up, and really gets organized and ready for the next day. All right. And if we cut that short or we don't get that deep quality sleep we need over a period of a couple of days, then it has a dramatic impact on our capability to function and reason and recall and process things at a high level. So regular exercise, healthy eating strategy, and sleep and recovery are the essentials to functioning optimally. All right. We can survive anything pretty much physiologically, but if we want to function optimally, which is what I've always been about, again, selfishly from being an athlete, it's always been about performance, but we're all athletes at the end of the day, and we all can thrive versus survive if we do some key things, right? And so this drives this, and to keep this strong and efficient and effective, then we need to do these things.
So when Sting was hooked up to the EEG,
what would they do? What you're referring to? This was a study done about 15 years ago, and it was at McGill University in Canada. And they asked Sting if he'd be willing to participate in an experiment, a research project. What they did was they hooked his brain up to various types of assessment technology, and they had him do different things. They had him write music. They had him perform music. They had him read music. They had him sing. And every time he switched and did one of those different things, a different area in his brain lit up like a Christmas tree. So the other piece of keeping your brain strong and functional is doing things like playing a musical instrument or learning a new language. We always, just like our muscle and our body needs stimulation and structural challenges, so does our brain. And that is another key component of functioning optimally, is always to continue to learn something new and positively stress your brain in that regard. And it shows, and Sting was a perfect example of this, doing different aspects. I mean, one component, playing a musical instrument was one thing, it lit up one part of his brain, and writing was another. So the takeaway from that is doing a lot of different things stimulates different areas of your brain. So when you're learning something new, when you're doing something physical, and when you're sleeping, they're all doing very different things, but they're all doing very good things for our brain.
Kevin, I'm so appreciative of your time. How can people stay in touch with you? How do they follow you? How do they learn more about how to stay healthy through exercise?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. I enjoy the conversation, as always. Well, I'm on LinkedIn at Kevin D. Steele, PhD. So that's, I have a lot of professional connections and following there. And my email is kdsteelephd@yahoo.com. So you can find me either one of those places. And if you have questions or I can help you out, then I'm happy to try and do so. I don't have all the answers, but I do know that if you do what we're talking about regularly, then you'll do pretty well.
And he's a very popular keynote speaker. So if you have an event coming out, reach out to him. He's very motivating and inspiring. Kevin, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you very much. And you all have a great, wonderful day, and make sure you get your workout in today.
And share the episode with anybody that can benefit from this. Leave us a comment, and we'll see you on the next episode of Next Level Healing. This podcast is intended for the purpose of providing information and education. It does not provide advice and is not meant to be used for any self-diagnosis or the replacement of any kind of licensed professional. The creators and individuals appearing here do not endorse any specific tests, positions, medications, products, or procedures. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.